Welcome to NarraScope 2020's Hour with the IFTF Board of Directors. This panel features the board of the Interactive Fiction Technology Foundation, the charitable nonprofit that is the parent organization of NarraScope, among various other projects. I'm Jason McIntosh, president and co-founder of IFTF. I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about the whys and the hows of IFTF's board. After that, I'd like to give our board members, myself included, a chance to describe our individual responsibilities within the organization and review the activity each of us has overseen since last year's NarraScope. And after that, we'll open up the floor with discussion with y'all. So, IFTF's board sits at the root level of the organization for making sure that everything IFTF does stays on mission and within budget. Our mission being IFTF's responsibility to the community as a steward for core IF technologies and services. The board is given its definition and authority by the organization's bylaws, which you can find on our website. And according to those bylaws, the board elects its own membership, with each director serving a 2-year term. Importantly, the board itself doesn't perform the core public service work of the organization. That's handled by the program committees, each of which is in charge of one IFTF program. So you have the IFComp committee and the Twine committee and so on. The board is responsible for creating and overseeing these committees, but each one has its own charter, which set out its own rules for budget and mission and membership. And that makes each program like its own semi-autonomous organization within IFTF, with its own goals, strategies, and leadership. Committees do report to the board. And to facilitate this, we do require that at least one board member sit on every committee. In IFTF's early days, all the committees were actually led by the board members. As time goes on, we start to see programs led by community members who do not sit on the board. And at present, that includes our IFComp program, which is chaired by Jacqueline Ashwell, and the Int Fiction Forums program led by Danny Willis. Our other programs are led by board members pulling double duty. So on that note, I'd like to introduce our board members one by one. And after I do that, I'll invite each to say a few words about their responsibilities and goals within the organization and activity they've been involved with since June 2019, which is the last time we all sat down at a NarraScope like this. And I want to do that alphabetically, so that means we start with Liza Daly. Liza is a software engineer and a technology executive who specializes in digital publishing and web-based storytelling. She founded IFMud, an influential chat room for the IF community, and authored works including Harmonia, which won the 2017 Zizzy Award for the best use of awards, plural, for the best use of multimedia and best use of innovation. Chris Klimas created Twine, an open source tool for interactive text-based storytelling in 2009 and continues to lead the project. He's also the author of several IF works, including the award-winning Blue Chairs, and is a principal at Unmapped Path. Jason McIntosh has been an active game creator, critic, and consultant since the late 1990s. His IF work includes The Warbler's Nest, which won the 2010 Zizzy Award for Best Story, and the multiplayer experiment Barbetween. Jason organized the annual interactive fiction competition from 2014 through 2017 and continues to maintain its software. Judith Pintar directs the Electronic Literatures and Literacies Lab at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She has been a game author and teacher of IF since her AGT game Cosmoserve was released as shareware in the early 1990s. She is committed to extending the use of IF languages and platforms into educational and public spaces and as a tool for digital inclusion. And finally, Andrew Plotkin was put in front of a colossal cave terminal at the age of 8 and the experience stuck. He has been writing influential IF games, tools, and reviews since the 20th century. He chairs IFTF's IF archive program and is a member of its conference committee as well. And that taps me out of slides. So I would like to turn this over to the board members, starting with, I'm going to actually unshare my screen so that we're not looking at people's names and we can actually focus on faces. And invite Liza to say a few words about her role on the board and what she's been involved with over the last year.
Sure, thanks, Jason. Yeah, I'm Liza Daly. I'm our most recently added board member from 2018. I'm the only one who currently doesn't work on a committee, but I am our secretary, and I am responsible for doing much of the writing of the organization, including our quarterly and sometimes more often than that newsletter.
All right, thank you. My own slides, life is complicated. So moving on to Chris.
Yeah, Jason, is now the right time to sort of talk through what the Twine Committee itself has been up to, or should I just talk about myself personally?
I would love to hear about both of these things, quite honestly.
Well, let me read you my diary. So, as Jason said in his slides, the kind of the bulk of my work with IFTF is leading the Twine Committee. And one sort of thing that I want to sort of set as like a ground level sort of thing is that the Twine Committee's purpose is to help out the Twine community at large. It isn't really to make decisions about Twine development or what features are we going to add to it, what bugs are we going to work on now, that kind of thing. Its scope is a lot more broad than that. And so like the stuff that we've been working on this past year or so, there are three main things. The first is that we've trademarked the term Twine and assigned that trademark to IFTF. And I know that trademarks sometimes cause concern with folks in the open source community. And so I want to underline with that part that we did this as a purely protective measure. And if you look at other open source projects that you probably use every day, things like Linux, Debian, the VLC media player, all kinds of projects are trademarked, in fact. And so this is a thing that happens a lot when open source projects become kind of big. Second thing that we worked on this past year was a series of technical specs and that describe the behavior of Twine and other things that are related to it. And the purpose of that was really to a certain degree, level the playing field, but also share some knowledge that wasn't documented anywhere. And so the point of having specs like this is that it means that if you want to build a tool that works with Twine stories, or a tool that produces Twine stories, maybe you think that like Twine is great, except it needs three better things. That information that lets you that would let you build stuff that works with Twine, or then takes Twine's output and does something with it. All that stuff is now public knowledge now, and we have a process in place for when we need to expand it, how we're going to go about doing that. All that stuff used to be done in a pretty ad hoc manner, and so the committee has done a really fantastic job with that. And the third thing, I will go ahead and embarrass Dan because I believe he's sort of sitting here moderating things, is the Twine Cookbook. The Twine Cookbook was not a project I don't believe that we started last year. I could be wrong about that. But it is one that has certainly flourished this year. And Dan has really shown a lot of leadership and done a lot of hard work bringing that to life. He's not the only person who contributes to it by far, but he's kind of the main shepherd for it, I would say. And so it has blossomed, I really feel, into this amazing resource right now. One of the biggest pain points that I think has been in the Twine community has been a lack of documentation. And so this is, I think, one of the best efforts that has been done recently to help with that situation. So those are three things. And the one thing I also want to add is a thing that is sort of ongoing and like a mini ad maybe. And that is related to a very popular Twine story hosting service called Philomela. Philomela was created, I believe, by Colin Mark. I think he collaborated with one other person on it originally, but he has been the maintainer on it. And if you are a person who's part of the Twine community, you probably know that Philomela has gone read-only as of, I think, September 2019. And that was because Colin didn't have the resources and time and so forth to be able to work on it at that point. And so what we're doing inside the committee is we're looking for folks to continue Philomela. We have actually an RFP out there on the IFTF website. It's really important to us. It was important to me, at least, that IFTF fund the work of sort of continuing Philomela. And so the RFP kind of codifies what that selection process looks like, what we're looking for in a long-term kind of way. all those kinds of things. And I'll dig up in a second, I'll dig up the link to the RFP. I'll post it in the chat. So if you're a person who is a web developer yourself, or maybe you know somebody who might be interested in doing this, please take a look or pass it along yourself. And that's it for Twine stuff, I think.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Moving on to myself, because that's where I fall alphabetically. I have had largely a static year in a good sense, as far as like public accomplishments in IFTF. That was kind of the theme of, I'll just plug one thing I do every year, is I write the transparency report, which I just printed this out on my printer a while ago, but you can find it on our website as a lovely 7-page long PDF. And one thing that I'm focusing on as president this year and over the past year with the rest of the board is process and thinking forward. To that end, we did something for the first time as an organization, which is we hired an outside consultant to help us think about how we should grow and next steps that we should take, so that we're, are we actually, how do we self-examine that we're actually completing our own mission? Should the board be larger? And now IFTF turned 4 years old this March. And I do think that we're at, even as every year goes by, and I'm always happy with ways that we are meeting our original mission, but I'm also very interested in ways that assumptions I had about the way that what IFTF would be doing. Of course, we're not necessarily moving in those directions. And are we doing that because we've been called to serve the community in different ways, or are we failing to meet our initial goalposts? So a lot of what we're going to work on over the next year is think about growth and organization and figuring out what we're doing. So that's good. I've been happy to play a key role in that. More practically speaking, I'm noticing my own slide now. It still says Chair Accessibility Testing Program. That is what I did do last year. Literally days before NarraScope 2019, we shipped our accessibility testing report. That continues to be, I think, one of the better things we've done as an organization. And I continue to help with the technological side of IFComp. I was interested, Chris, when you were talking about documentation and how important that is to the Twine community. And that is also very true to IFComp and the technological side of that. And that's one thing that our group in the IFComp committee and its technology subcommittee is focusing on right now, in order to make sure that that project is able to continue to be used and handed down through, both organizationally and technologically different hands who don't have to make it up from scratch on the fly every single time they inherit the project from somebody else. That's really important work, and it's so easy to overlook documentation, especially when code is so much more fun sometimes. And that's all I have to say for myself, I think. So let's move on to Judith.
Hello, so I'm the chair of the Education Committee, and Education Committee has pretty simple mission, 3-part mission, so that makes it unsimple. The first one is supporting the teaching of IF, and that is not simple, because that means teaching with IF, so using IF as a pedagogical tool in the classroom, like a PowerPoint, an interactive medium for use in the classroom for student work, teaching about IF, so in literature classes, about the history of IF and its use and the way you would teach any narrative, and then teaching how to make IF. IF in design classes, narrative design classes, or game design classes. And people teach IF at all educational levels. So supporting the teaching of IF means supporting grade school teachers, middle school teachers, high school teachers, college teachers, adult educators. Every one of you who's ever shared your knowledge with a particular platform with your colleagues and your friends. That's also teaching IF. So our mission includes all of that. So not just professional educators, but all of us as potentially IF educators. So then number 2 mission is not just supporting the teaching, but supporting the teachers. And that also is, I'm going to talk about that more in a second. And I want to say a little bit about the fabulous conversation that we had yesterday in our education committee session, where we invited educators who are here at the conference to share their ideas with us. I just want to quickly say, and this one's really important, that our 3rd mission is social in scope, that we care about inclusion. We care about digital inclusion. We care about inequalities in our society. And I think it's really important that we mention that we're having this conference in the midst of an incredible display of the inequalities of our society and our world. And the Education Committee is one of the ways that IFTF can segue with those needs, right? So it's actually a way that we can serve. And teachers are on the front line, educating. And IF is interactive narrative is just an astonishingly powerful tool for communicating, for educating on the educational part, but then also access. So access to technology, access to literacy, particularly programming literacy. So Twine, Inform 7, and other platforms that get mentioned less often, but are equally important to all of us in the community. Whatever our platforms of choice are demonstrating themselves to provide to young people alternative access to technological facilities, which otherwise, if you look at the demographics of CS programs, they're full of the usual suspects, who you might suspect to see there. And we have educational traditions which continue to exclude certain people from access to that. And IF is being used by educators, by people here at this conference in interesting and creative ways to break down those barriers to access. So that is in our mission, actually. Even if it's not the most obvious thing that we do, we support those sorts of ventures. So really quickly, I just want to mention the members of the committee, all of whom have contributed to NarraScope materially through the workshop day on Thursday, and members of our greater community of educators associated with us on Thursday. That would be Brendan Desolitz, Stuart Multhrop, Chris Klimas, who does kind of triple duty on committees, Matt Farber, and Anastasia Salter. And hopefully you got to check out some of their workshops. So in the last 2 years at NarraScope, the Education Committee has been responsible for the workshop portion, the teaching portion of NarraScope. This year we also did a 2-week Inform 7 boot camp, which was just really successful, and I couldn't have done it without Brendan Desolitz and Caleb Wilson, another sort of educator friend in our community, in the Educational Committee, and Alexis Kim, my own graduate student here at the University of Illinois, all chipped in to provide support in that. So that was one of our big projects, was getting, oh, and I should say that Graham Nelson also joined those Thursday workshops as an IF educator, as part of our educators community, as well as being the author of Inform 7. He's also an IF educator. So he also joined our slate of workshops on Thursday. So that was one of the things we do. Just really quickly now, just to sum up, you can watch, you can go and watch the recorded session of the Education Committee and hear some of the amazing suggestions that people gave on how to more successfully create community among educators and more successfully share resources that everybody needs and hook in everybody's fabulous teaching ideas. So I just want to say this next year going forward, I think some really exciting things are going to happen coming out of the Education Committee. That's me.
Okay, thank you, Judith. And finally, Andrew Plotkin, Zarf. What's up?
Hello. As you see, I am the person with the least interesting background of the IFTF board. Yes, but you've got good balance. Anyway. I'm the treasurer of the organization, which means that I have a spreadsheet, and if you donate to the organization, you get a thank you note from me eventually. And my other big role, which everyone is hopefully aware of, is I'm on the NarraScope conference committee. Jason actually put up an old slide. I'm not a co-chair this year. The co-chairs are Justin and Adri, but I am active on the committee. I've been handling most of the speaker communication and the treasury, thus more spreadsheets. And of course, I also introduced the conference on Friday. Hopefully in a manner appropriate to the spine-meltingly good keynote talk that Zelivir gave on Friday morning. So we'll all know how the conference went at the end of the week. That's a work in progress, and I've been thinking about nothing else for 3 days. But I should also talk about the IF archive. I am the chairperson on that. I usually say director. The IF archive has been mostly just trundling along, doing its work of hosting files and serving them out to the web. We did have a couple of projects this year just to improve the indexing code base that lies behind it, which is not particularly noticeable to the public, but we have added a little bit of facility for supporting more metadata, so that if you go to the IF archive and look through the files, the games will now have links to IFDB, so that the information like game author, title, publication date, system, and so forth are starting to be absorbed into the IF archive itself. And we're hoping this year to move forward on a project to make more of the games that are on the archive immediately playable. You may know that Inform Games and a few others have IFTB links that say, play this right now. But all the Twine games that are stored on the IF archive, well, you just get a zip file and you have to download it yourself. So we'd like to have play this now buttons on every game which is remotely web playable on the IF archive, just as a matter of making them more approachable to the general public. And it kind of overlaps the Philomela stuff that Chris was talking about, but that gets into inter-service rivalries, or writing up RFPs for slightly different needs, which has been an interesting ongoing topic. Feel free to ask us about that later. Were there any other? Am I on anything else? I can't remember. No, mostly I just handle spreadsheets.
We do love it when people or organizations donate money and make Zarf have to update our spreadsheets. So yeah, just as a reminder, we are a 501c3 organization, tax deductible where appropriate by law. I also wanted to apologize for my my copy pasta on your slide, Zarf. I didn't mean to accidentally slight Adri or Justin. Yes.
You also spelled NarraScope with only one capital N but no capital S. That's against our style guidelines.
Oh my goodness. Sorry about that. Capital S, sorry about that. I did want to say that it's been a very interesting year for RFPs this year. I think this is the first year that we've started to generate requests for proposals, project proposals to the public. And that is one of the reasons we've had the confidence to do that is not just our internal organizations and our explorations into figuring out who we are as a nonprofit, but the success that we've had in the recent past. I guess we're a young organization, so by definition, all past is recent past. But the early successes we've had in moderately sized fundraising efforts, probably the most prominent of which is the annual Colossal Fund, fundraising that IFComp has done every year for, I think, the past 3 years. We successfully raise a few $1,000s that goes, most of which goes to authors and the rest of which goes to the competition itself every year. And that has taught us, yeah, we can actually raise money for projects if we have a goal in mind and we say to the public, here's what we need money for. If you donate it, we will spend it on exactly this. And then we do it, and then we have proof of it. And that works. And that's given us the confidence to start doing some RFPs, which isn't quite the same thing as fundraising, but it's a thing that requires fundraising to actually do follow through on. And it's been really exciting to be part of that process, to be able to start projects that way. A little bird tells me that I should also mention that we also did a successful fundraising for NarraScope this year, and we received $6,000 from y'all. So thank you so much for that. We literally would not be able to do this thing we are doing right now, and we'll be doing for several days, without the generosity of the community that we are very privileged to be a part of. So thank you.
And let me interrupt to say that nearly all of that money is earmarked for honoraria for speakers. Like that money is going out to the people who came, not us. We're on the board. That would be like all the other speakers.
Yeah, one of my favorite reasons to collect money is to just be a throughput channel and to just pass it along. And I mean, that's really, I don't need to go into the secret history of IFTF again. It's a story I love telling again and again, but it basically, at root, it comes out of discussion when I was the coordinator of the IFComp for a few years. And in 2015, we were noticing that people just wanted to give money to the comp itself. And we didn't have a clear way of doing that. And other people had the idea of, it'd be great if we could just give money to authors and make it tax deductible somehow, but that would mean some sort of a charitable organization, and we don't have that. So I talked to a lawyer and it happened. That's the oversimplified version, but it's kind of true. This is a fundraising effort for IFComp that got way out of hand in the best way possible. And I wanted to continue getting way out of hand in that spirit of generosity. Absolutely. We are now at 30 minutes of our hour with the board. So I would like to give the audience a chance to, if they have any questions for the board while we're all here. I think that there's a magic directorial voice who's on Twitch, but if not, I can continue talking. One side project I can talk about in the meantime is the forums at intfiction.org. Do I have that URL correctly? I'm going by memory here. Yes, I'm seeing nods. Yes, that is those are the IF community forums. That is one of the various community projects that IFTF took under its financial and legal stewardship last year. And it's one of those things, it's like, there's really not a lot that I have to say about it, because it's one of those beautiful projects that, like, the board isn't on at all. It's we're just helping it move along and doing its own thing, and it's been working fantastically. Now I see a couple of questions. Oh, this is a good one right off the bat. So from Clark BHM, do you find that your board size of 5 is adequate to support all your needs? Have you considered expanding? That is a fantastic and apt and well-timed question. So the reason we are only 5 people is because we started the first iteration of IFTF when we first started talking about this in 2015. We were literally just 4 friends from the Boston community who had been just kicking this around as an idea, talking about IFComp. And we said, like, let's just start with what we have and also invite the Twine guy in. And that was our board. we knew it wasn't a lot of people, but it also wasn't very diverse in various ways. But we said, you know what? Let's just start somewhere, and we'll get better. And in the 4 years since then, we've remained just 5 people, and it is a very good. And we absolutely don't assume that that is going to stay the size it is. And one thing I can tell you that the consultant we talked to was like, "Wow, your board is very small. 5, huh?" So in our discussions that we're going to have internally and with project stakeholders and with our advisors and other folks in the very near future, actually, one topic that I'm very interested in pursuing is wondering if we want to increase the size of the board and also have substructures that one sees in other nonprofits, like a steering committee that is separate from the board that takes care of the day-to-day work and allows the board to continue to have more of an oversight role, but doesn't get into the nitty-gritty every day. The way that we've been doing it is our board and our steering committee are basically one and the same, the 5 of us. We've met bi-weekly for years, and that is unusual. That is unusual for a nonprofit. So in that sense, we're still kind of in training wheels mode, and it's something to, I don't want to say grow out of, but grow beyond. And it is not unlikely, I cannot speak in indefinites, but it is not unlikely that a increase in board size and all the good things that can come with that, in terms of diversity in every sense of the word, is something that we can enjoy from that. So,
can I insert a comment?
Please.
My feeling on this, of course, here we are like having the debate in front of you, which is not necessarily ideal, but it is true that we currently have a group of 5 people, and it is not, and that group must expand in some way. Whether that means adding more board members or adding a steering committee of more people to do more of the work, or expand or devolving more of the responsibility of the organization to committees. That's the subject. That's the discussion that we need to have. Simply saying board size is an oversimplification. That's my take on the whole thing.
I agree with everything you just said. Board size is something that we are going to consider, but it's a thing on the table, and that's not necessarily the future path of IFTF. But yeah, it's something we're thinking about, and everything you said is true, Zarf. Next question is from Dan999. There's a lot of repeated letters in there. Perhaps it's just Dan9 then. Does IFTF have a wish list for volunteer opportunities or donations? That's a great question. Do we? Like, are we thinking of something like a single web page about like, hey, we need volunteers if you want to help. Here's a list of vacancies we have. I don't know that we have anything that simple.
We've done this a little, we've done sort of discrete calls for volunteers, and usually as part of the newsletter or from tweets, but it's definitely true that we don't have a consolidated list. And I like that idea of a wish list that's public, since right now it's pretty hit or miss whether you see one of these calls.
Yeah. Allow me to take this opportunity to plug our newsletter, by the way. Liza, what would be the easiest way for somebody to find our newsletter?
I would say go to our website, whose domain name I should know.
IFTechFoundation.org.
And there is a sign up link in the top nav there.
All right, thank you. Yeah, the newsletter is something that we've been kind of on again for the last few years. Liza has changed it to on, and it has stayed gloriously on, and I think quarterly for a few quarters now, so that's good. We also have a blog at blog.iftechfoundation.org, but the newsletter comes straight to your inbox and is gloriously illustrated with this vintage clip art collection that Liza found, which I am always impressed by. A lot of floral designs and weird machines. So if you want to see some steampunkified IF Tech Foundation news, that's your source. But again, that is.
If I can just pop in here and say that a lot of the volunteer opportunities are specific to committees. So rather than, we're rather unlikely to regularly centralize and keep those. We might do that through newsletter occasionally, but you're more likely, if you're interested in volunteer opportunities, to check into the committees. So for example, in the education committee, we're going to be improving communication amongst people who are interested, and we would likely be reaching out to look for volunteers through those community networks of our committee. I would say the same thing for Twine. You know, the Twine committee has the places where they sort of hang out. It's not difficult to find the Twine people, and that you're likely to see those volunteer opportunities there. I think it's a good idea that we should centralize, and we probably will use our sort of regular communication channels to do that. Because this is changing information. So, you know, we'll look to our newsletter, I would say, and could also blog volunteer opportunities too.
We certainly don't want to tell people, oh, go off and find us on your own.
No, you're right.
That's not the right message.
I just mean to say that IFTF, the organization, doesn't necessarily have need for volunteers, but the committees do, our projects do, right? So the volunteers adhere to our, you know, the different projects that we're doing.
Yep, agreed. Thank you. So that's a good suggestion, Dan, and allow us to fold that into our hive mind in our upcoming internal conversations. Thank you. Moving on to the next one from Katrina Starks. I think this is going to be one for Krista to field. Why extend yourselves to revive? I've always said Philomela, but I think you all have been saying Philomela. Why extend yourselves to revive that website instead of partnering with a place like itch.io, that I can say, which already hosts games of all types and has great exposure?
That is a really interesting question that I kind of want to follow up on Discord after we finish today, because I have an answer, but I'm not sure that it's really the correct answer. Obviously, like we should not be in the business and could not really compete with itch in any, like, because itch is humongous, right? And is actually a tremendous sort of, hesitate to call it a marketplace, but essentially it is, of games and so forth, especially Twine games. The difference I see between it and what Philomela did was Philomela was really, really low friction, in the sense of that, first of all, to get something hosted on Philomela, it was like a 20-second kind of process. It was a kind of thing that people oftentimes, like when they're doing, at least in what I had seen, at least people when they're doing Twine workshops and things like that, they would spend like, okay, in the last 5 minutes of our workshop, we're going to go onto Philomela and upload our games, and now we can share. Whereas I think itch is a little bit more, it's not difficult by any means, but there's a little bit more to getting set up with itch, I think, than Philomela had in the past. At least that's been my observation, but I could be looking at it incorrectly, and that's why I kind of want to do like what I'd like to chat like after this, actually. And the second point, I think, or the second potential reason, is that, and maybe I have this wrong because I'm far from an expert on itch, is that I feel like itch is more like Philomela was like, if you have something that you're not 100% ready to show the world, but you want to show like 10 of your friends or something like that, and you don't want to mess around with Google Drive or email or something like that, Philomela was not super public necessarily in that way. You could opt when you posted a story on there. You could check like a box to say, like, I want to announce it. And of course, you get the link yourself to share however you want. But you don't have to check that box. It can go off into space. And obviously, I might be splitting hairs a bit here because like with itch, like it's not like you can, like if you can also opt, I'm sure, not to be indexed by like search engines and so forth. But to me, I see them as slightly different use cases, but I really like the question because I think it's actually, they're more similar than they are disparate.
And as far as this question is coming from me as much as anyone else, but as far as follow-up conversation on Discord, is there a particular channel that we can bust out on after this, or?
Yeah, I think I saw before I hopped on to the session that I think it's happening in question and answer 2. There are 2 because the sessions are sort of running into each other, or discussion from one session is starting, you get it.
Yeah,
but I think that's,
right.
I'll definitely I'll look at both. I'll put it that way, but I'm sure that we'll figure out which one of the 2.
The tech support elves say question and answer 2, I'm told. Okay, cool, thanks. Next question. What ways is the organization working to increase diversity without putting the burden on marginalized groups? A great question. And my perhaps inevitable answer / dodge is, yeah, we're in a position of weakness right now in that if you just mean the board, obviously there are certain lacking of representation here, and that is something I would like to address. That is something we've been aware of for years, literally. I don't have a pat answer to that, but that's something that I really want to focus on when we're having our strategic discussions in the very near future. So yeah, I don't have an answer other than to acknowledge it's like, yeah, I agree, we could do a lot better, and that's something we're working on. I know that sounds like a dodge, and it is to a degree.
One discussion that I've had with some people, of course, I mean, without putting the burden on marginalized groups is an important part of the question, because if we say to someone, hey, come join the IFTF board, it's a shitload of work and you'll have to be at meetings every 2 weeks, and all you get out of it is your face on a website and the knowledge of a job well done, that's putting the burden on the person who's joining. If we had a role for paid work for the organization, then we could tell people that we are willing to pay for the labor that you're putting in for us, which would be a wonderful thing. But of course, our current fundraising levels are, every year we raise a few $1,000s for IFComp, and now we're raising a few $1,000s for NarraScope. So it would be a huge phase change to start having paid positions in what is currently an all volunteer organization. So that's really hard. And that's as far as my thinking's gone there. Like, wow, there's a direction we could go with a great deal of leveling up.
Certainly something to aspire to, though, for more than one reason. So that's a great point.
So can I jump in here again too?
Yes,
on the issue that the issue is not just sort of diversity of the board and of the organization, but also of the IF world in general, and that this is a place where we need our community to respond. This isn't something we can fix by saying we should be a more diverse community, or what can we do? But I think that what we can do is amplify the good work done by our members and by our communities in these regards. I mean, I know that there are people who are actively working in their communities to teach IF to underrepresented communities, and working in their educators working in their school systems, in their units and universities to do amazing programs. And what IFTF can do is a better job of amplifying these and sharing these as exemplums and encouraging other people to do this. And I guess I see this as part of, actually Liza and I should probably work on this, because it cross-cuts both communication and education. What are ways? I think that's an area, thank you for the question, because it actually puts a spotlight. This will undoubtedly come up in our, we're going to be having some deep conversations coming up soon on the direction. And this is definitely going to be on the agenda.
I love the point about amplification, because that is a topic that I have thought every which way about ever since we're founded. Like, to what extent is IFTF's role to amplify and share the news and repeat the messaging of other projects in the IF world, other than specifically the projects that are literally under our wing. I think we've sort of soft changed our mind about that a lot over the past 4 years, and it would be really good to actually define a position on that in a way that would help everybody. So thank you, Judith, for definitely keeping that on our radar. And that was a great question. That is, yeah, it's getting us thinking in a lot of different ways. So thank you. I'll move on to the next question. This might be for either Chris or Judith, I bet. This is from Inca Drinker. What is IFTF's relationship with the Electronic Literature Organization or other similar orgs?
We're buds, we hang out.
It's kind of true.
Actually, I mean, I can say that specifically because last year, NarraScope's host at MIT was Nick Montfort, who teaches at MIT and other places. And Nick Montfort is a past president of the ELO. So we have sort of literally collegial connections that way, but we don't have any formal relationships or co-projects at the present time, unless Judith knows of some that I don't.
Well, I mean, members of the education committee are also active members of ELO. So there are soft boundaries. We're parallel missions in some ways. We have a lot of overlap of people and interest and subject, and yet we are distinct, right? So that's for a philosophical conversation to be had over a beer, right? Where those lines of distinction are. Buds is a great way. It's a good way to say it, really.
Yeah, there's a number of larger and more experienced nonprofits in that are tangential to IFTF that we're happy to know and that are aware of us and have coached us in one way or another. There's the ones that you just mentioned. I would also name the Free Software Conservancy, which is led by I think Karen Sandler, who I keep running into at different conferences. She's been a very wonderful guide in like to me in just conversation when IFTF was just starting out, and they're not about writing or electronic literature or creative work necessarily per se. They're more about free software. But again, this is one of those funny ways in that interactive fiction is based on software as much as it is on writing, and we just have creative inputs from a lot of different directions like that. And yeah, it's so we have like sort of a friendly, non informal alliance with a lot of not so much other organizations, but individuals in them who've been very helpful to us as we've gotten started and started to get rolling, I think. Able Gamers too. Yeah. That's probably the organization that we've had the closest thing to an alliance with, in that the Able Gamers charity, which is another nonprofit that is focused on accessibility in video games, which is to say making video games playable, especially to, but not limited to, people with disabilities of various kinds. The president of and co-founder of Able Gamers, Mark Bartlett, was on our accessibility committee and did a lot of fantastic work in helping us make that report and do our research into it. And it was a real honor to be able to credit another nonprofit, another allied nonprofit like that, in putting out that piece of work. So yeah, that was fantastic. Yeah, I think that answers that question. Any other questions? I think we have about 10 more minutes, 8 more minutes. If not, I think one question I'd like to bounce to the group is there any, other than things that have come up already, are there other things you're looking forward to working on, like say over the next year, that are either on your plate right now as either a board member or as working on another IFTF project, or something, a direction that you'd like to see IFTF move into?
One of the things that came up yesterday at the EdCom, which would actually be kind of exciting beyond the education committee, is the idea of a more or less permanent Twitch channel where we could stream members of our community. I don't mean us. I don't mean the 5 of us like the board show. No, I mean the members of our community could regularly be streamed on a wide variety of issues. And then, of course, from the education point of view, these would be archived and teachers could use them. So if we invited game designers to come in and do 15 minutes about their game, right, and their process on a particular thematic topic, which then we would do an excellent job indexing, where teachers could use these in their classes on a variety of topics, and that we could create sort of an encyclopedia of interactive fiction, a visual encyclopedia, which would be a resource for educators, but also the community. That's super exciting and seems where a week ago would have seemed like a little bit of a pipe dream. But this week, after these days of incredible success on the Discord channel, and the way that the community has expressed itself and connected and shared and been enthusiastic and energetic, makes me feel like a big crowdsourced effort like that is possible. So that's something that really emerged from our conversations with the community yesterday and is pretty exciting.
And it reminds me of something that I know that we keep inevitably comes up a lot repeatedly in internal conversations, is like, ooh, we should have a podcast, or other like sort of branded periodicals of one kind or another, or a Twitch stream, as you say. I would love to see more things like that. I would love to see like more creative media with lots of, with the little IFTF logo on it, but then a wide variety of be able to showcase all kinds of different work and thoughts and opinions on all things, not just IF, but narrative fiction, if you will, or interactive narrative. That would be amazing, and that's really hard to do. But yeah, I look forward to seeing what might come out of that, Judith. We have one more question. Two more questions. I'll do them one at a time and see if we can squeeze them both in. But first, from our pal DVD, what about digital LARPs like MUDs? I'm not sure what you mean by that exactly. Yes, they exist, but what's the relationship between IFTF and MUDs? That is a great question. And the first thing that occurs to me is that I think a couple of us were on the Titans of Text podcast last winter, which was a lot of fun. That is a podcast from the MUD community. And there was some neat cross-pollination that came out of that, in that this is a podcast by some MUD people that weren't really familiar with interactive narrative or even IF, even in its classical forms. So that show, like after we were on it, they did a show with, I was on it with Jacqueline Ashwell, I remember now. And I think they followed up and did a show with Ryan Veeder, who is an IF author, and they've been having fun. And I think a couple of them might be in attendance today, so say hi if you are. But yeah, MUDs are great. I don't think we have any formal relationship with the budding world right now, but I would love to work more with the Mudsters. I should also, give a nod to Liza Daly here, who is, of course, the creator of IF MUD, which is still a thing. And yeah, I mean, I know, Liza, you're not necessarily still in the day-to-day maintenance of that much anymore, but that is still
it's
very
also,
much,
I think, the only MUD I've ever been on, so I'm definitely not the MUD expert.
if you're going to be on one, you may as well make it yourself. So yeah, if you want a truly old school, but still in some ways surprisingly user-friendly, for lack of a better term, a chat room that's been around since the 90s, about talking about IF and literally everything else. Is it ifmud.port4000.org, I think? Google it, you'll find it. Yeah, all right. I think we have time for one last question, if we're not cut off. From Dan Cox. Thanks, Dan, for moderating, by the way. What are you all most excited about in the coming future for IFTF? Most excited about? Like, honestly, this sounds like, again, a dumb answer, but honestly, we are having our very first ever strategic meeting next weekend, and I am so psyched for it because we're going to be there, but also I've invited representatives from all of our projects are going to be there. Our lawyer is going to be there, in the best sense. We love you, Heidi. And we've invited everybody from our advisory board to be there, and a lot of people have RSVP'd yes. And we're going to sit around for 3 hours and just get excited about stuff. Excuse me. And I am unironically looking forward to that. How about y'all?
One thing I think we talked about it very, very briefly, but something that, and I'm going to sort of answer, I think the question, Jason, that you posed, this one and that one, because it's sort of a combination of what we are already doing, but what we could be doing or expanding. And that's the Colossal Fund. It's the thing where we are sort of, again, acting more or less as a conduit for fundraising to give money to IF authors more or less directly through the IF Comp. And so I think that has seen a lot of success right out of the gate. It's relatively small. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's not like anybody's getting going to be able to live off of this money or anything like that. But I see it's being distributed as opposed to like some kind of like we sit in judgment on which projects should be funded or something like that. Instead, we're pushing funding into the community at large in a more or less egalitarian way. And I could see us, at least I personally, I think we should expand on that in the future and look and think about ways that we can build on that kind of success so that to get funds and other kinds of resources out to authors in a way that doesn't put us in this position of judgment as to who is funded and how and so forth.
Yeah, one of the things that comes up in perennial discussion about IF Comp is that it has become very large because it has prize money, and the solution clearly is to allow other IF competitions and events to have prize money and maybe have more fundraisers and like more pipes going outwards. It's an idea. I mean, we discuss these things. I mean, my answer for what am I excited about in the upcoming future is NarraScope 2021.
We got to get through the second half of NarraScope 2020 first. Eyes on the prize. So we have 3 more minutes. I don't know. I think we're done with questions. My cat really wants to get into the room, but that's. I think she has a question.
Well, tell her to bring it to the Discord.
I will. You know what? I think
Macy.
that this is boy, listen to her go. This is probably an excellent time to wrap up then. So thank you all. Thank you, fellow board members, and thank you, NarraScope, for hosting us, giving us a slot to share again our adventures over the past year with y'all, and to hear what y'all have to think. And yes, we will be in the Discord at question and answer 2. I'm actually going to click on that right now so that I'm actually looking at it. There I am. So we'll see you there, and I suppose we'll wrap up on that note. Thank you, everybody, and have an excellent rest of NarraScope 2020.